So my name is Holly Owens, and I'm currently a second-year medical student here at the USC School of Medicine. And today I'm joined by my classmates and my fellow Rural Health Interest Group leaders, Layla Yazdi, Lyda Rossi, and Salem Carricker. We owe a lot of thanks to SCETV producer Xavier Blake in his work worth setting us up with us. And we would also like to thank the USC Center for Rural and Primary Healthcare for their huge role in putting this together as well. Joining us today, we have Dr. Megan Weiss, we have Miss Alonti McGill, we have Miss Brittany Wesley. So we, of course, are very appreciative of our four panelists joining us today. So first off, we have Dr. Xavier Blake, who is an award-winning public media professional with more than 20 years experience working as a producer, director, editor, and cinematographer. Mr. Blake currently lends his wealth of experience to SCETV as their assistant production/operations manager. As the national coordinator of U.S. input, he collaborates with other public media professionals to select films that represent the United States public media community at the International Public Television Conference annually. We would also like to lend a huge welcome to Dr. Jessica Berry. She is a native of Huger, South Carolina, and a fluent Gullah Geechee speaker who is passionate about educating others on the importance of celebrating linguistic diversity. She is currently the acting chair of the Speech Pathology and Audiology Department at SC State University and owner of a consulting agency where she advocates, researches, and provides professional development focused on inclusion of Gullah Geechee in K-12 and higher education. We also have Dr. Robert M Reinhardt. He is Director of Admissions and Enrollment Services and Assistant Dean for Diversity and Inclusion for the University of South Carolina School of Medicine. And in his roles, Dr. Reinhardt oversees the admissions process for medical students, as well as works to increase the number of underrepresented students who pursue careers in medicine. And then last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Eric Williams, who is the Assistant Dean for Student Affairs and the Director of the Introduction to Clinical Medicine First-Year Medical Student course at the University of South Carolina School of Medicine. He also teaches a junior-senior pre-med undergraduate class entitled Transitioning to Medical School. In addition, he works with the Prisma Health ACT team. In his after-hour jobs, he is a body step and body attack group exercise instructor at Move Fitness, and we hope you can return to that, Dr. Williams, soon. We encourage everyone to participate who's joining us today. Please feel free to ask questions in the chat. We do have some chat moderators who will look out for those. And then we're just going to go ahead and get right into this so we can have plenty of time for the discussion. So we're going to start off by opening up the floor to Mr. Blake. So Mr. Blake, can you please talk about your recent experiences being a producer for this documentary? And can you discuss the importance of this type of work in teaching about the Geechee community and their African roots?
Absolutely. First, I just want to say thank you for you all for having me and putting on this this panel. It's really important that we have these discussions, and the only way we can get better about our history is to have these really deep discussions about what's going on. This documentary was kind of 30 years in the making. We had a group from ETV go to Sierra Leone 30 years ago. And so they did this same sort of trip over to connect the dots between the Sierra Leonean people and the Gullah Geechee people here in the coast of South Carolina and Georgia and North Carolina. And so my co-producer, Betsy Newman, who was fantastic in this whole thing, said to me, "What do you think about let's go on this trip?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." And so we had to convince ETV to let us go, which was kind of hard. But we knew that the importance of this trip to show the straight line connection between the Gullah Geechee community and the Sierra Leonean people was very important. And one thing that we hope to do in this documentary is make sure we stated the contributions that the enslaved people that were brought to this country made to America. Because sometimes what I've been finding out in my work is that sometimes the history of America isn't always told completely and fully and truthfully. And if we're going to hope to progress any more in this country, we need to tell that history wholly and completely and fully. So the contributions of the enslaved people that were brought to this country aren't always recognized. And so one of the things we really hope to highlight, like I said, was that those contributions and how important those people were to America and to what America is today. So I think, like I said, having these discussions, these panel discussions, and having our documentary is a start. But we must continue to talk about the history of these people and how important they were to America.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Blake. And also, I wanted to ask Dr. Jessica Berry. So, what are your perspectives on this documentary as someone who professionally works with the Geechee community? Oh, your audio is muted still.
There we go. I should be on mute now. Well, let me start right there. Wahana Fadu. I hope I'm children doing good on the show call today. Well, let me say, first of all, thank you for having me on this call. Thank you, Mr. Blake, for creating this documentary and highlighting what I expressed has sort of been the invisible history, the invisible culture of Gullah Geechee that is now getting the national, international recognition. Watching this documentary beginning to end, because it highlighted, everybody said something when they went to Bunce Island, as they traveled all the way in to the inland parts of Africa. Everybody said, I felt at home. From the moment I landed, I felt at home. And each place I got to, I felt connected to. And I think being able to screen as a Gullah Geechee person who has not had that experience solidifies that invisible connection that we know we have with some place, and we know we have a connection with some other people, but nobody's told about it. Nobody's talking about it. Nobody shared it. So it really brought it to life. And I'm excited that it's sparking conversation. It's delivered, how we interact with people from this culture, and how we help each other celebrate, encourage, and honor what this language means to America in general. So I could go. I hope that answers your question.
It definitely does. Thank you for that. And just to follow up with it, so what would your advice to these future healthcare professionals in medicine and public health, what is your advice to them, just knowing about working with these communities like Gullah?
Continue to be curious, ask questions, bring in the elders of the community to share with you the terms and the language and the lingo that we use to hear. You know, because when you ask somebody, they might say, my sugar up. I eat a little bit of that. Understanding that what they mean is that their blood sugar might be high and something else. So taking the time to build a repertoire of community language that helps provide better health care to the community.
Thank you so much. And then,
Holly, can I add one thing?
Yes, of course.
I think what Dr. Berry says is a great point. And what I've learned in my storytelling is you got to be better listeners. And I think in healthcare, it's kind of the same thing, is where when you go into communities, it's not about what you think is happening and what's going on in that community. It's about listening and telling the story, or getting the information from the people that are telling you the story. And so the one thing that I've learned in my storytelling as I'm growing as a producer and doing these documentaries and stories is that it's not what I want the story to be, it's what the people want the story to be. And so I think that sort of compares to the healthcare aspect of that all.
That's a great point. And that goes great in to what I wanted to ask to Dr. Williams and Dr. Reinhardt. So I wanted to ask them, why is it important for us healthcare professionals to be aware of these Native communities such as Gullah?
I can start. I will give you an example from yesterday. So I was seeing a patient who is from that Charleston area, the Gullah area, and when I did the intake on him a while back, I was asking him about hallucinations and things. I'm a psychiatrist, so of course I always ask about that. And so he told me about the hag being on him in the mornings. And being from Savannah, I was familiar with that already, and so I knew what that meant. I mean, so he couldn't. He felt a little paralyzed first thing in the morning before he woke up, and was having some hallucinations. Well, you know, we call those hypnopompic hallucinations. They call it the hag. But if you don't know about that, and somebody says, "Well, there's a hag in my room," that could lead you to the wrong place, thinking, "Oh my goodness, is this person psychotic, or do I need to treat them? Are they schizophrenic?" No, it's part of what we used to call a culture bound, well, that's not quite a syndrome, but we used to call it some things culture bound syndromes. But you need to know about the people that you serve so that we don't misdiagnose them because of a lack of our knowledge. I'll give you one more example. This was several years ago in the ER, when Dr. Baird was saying working with the elders and working with people of the community. So I had someone in the ER who was convinced that she had a hex on her. And so I asked her, well, had you spoken with the doctors in your community? What are they saying? And I guess she was kind of surprised that I would even ask her that. But that's a part of her community and who she is. And so you have to bring in those complete parts of people. I can't just, or I don't think I should just say, oh, well, this person says she sees a shaman, or here, there's something wrong with her. No, that's part of the culture. And part of what I told her at the end was, well, consult, because there wasn't anything acutely wrong with her at the moment. But consult the faith healers in your community, see what they say, and get back to me. So that's just going back to you need to know the people that you treat in order to treat them well.
And let me just add that each person has a history. If you look at not only the Gullah Geechee people, if you look at people across the state of South Carolina, there are many rural areas. In each of these rural areas, they have different practices, different traditions, and based upon their practices and their traditions, that truly impacts who they are as individuals, from their value system to their eating habits, to the things that they do or do not do religiously affiliated. Those are the types of things that really impact if a person will truly do what the physician tells them to do. They will impact, some of the things that we as healthcare practitioners would actually recommend for them to do. But if we don't have an understanding of those types of historical perspectives, then we are operating at a disadvantage. And that's why, as a part of the medical school process and looking for things that make a medical student a good medical student, we look beyond what's listed in the SAT or the MCAT and the grade point average. We look for students who've been involved in their local communities, wherever those local communities are, because we think if students have a good understanding of their local communities, then they will be more apt to get involved, number one. And then number two, down the road, because they have gotten involved with those local communities, that when they become physicians, it won't be that difficult to develop those relationships with their patients. But students need to have this whole idea that each person comes from a unique background. Based upon those backgrounds, that actually impacts the things that they do, health-wise, eating-wise, exercise-wise, religious-wise, and all those types of things kind of interconnect with making that person who they are. And the better that students can understand these types of things, the better physicians down the road that they can become.
Thank you. Those were amazing perspectives from the both of you. Dr. Berry, it looked like you wanted to respond, or it looks like you had, when Dr. Williams was talking about the expression, I had a hag on me in the morning. Was that, I apologize if that's not right. Can you speak more about that? I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, so there are several colloquial cultural things that we do in the Gullah culture, and one of those things is the hag, and one of those things, like Dr. Williams was mentioning, was talking about having a root. So people would go to the hospital because they believe somebody put a root on them because there was an egg in their yard and they ate it, and they believe that it was a symptom of somebody actually doing something to them. And that's, we grew up, we talked about. And so him asking, did you go to the elders, was saying, did you go to Dr. Buzzard, who is traditionally in the Gullah Geechee community, you go to a healer, and he is the one who provides the medicine to help you. We never really ran to the doctor per se. So even the notion of going to the doctor is new within the community, because that's not what we were taught to do. We went to the elders to provide health care. So even jumping over that hurdle and having those conversations with clients in that, I was like, yeah, because We talked about the hag all the time.
And even understanding that, and I'm from rural Chester County, and so, you know, we had the understanding of the hags and those things with Dr. Buzzard, but in our case, it wasn't that we necessarily believe in those things, but we didn't have the resources to be able to go and afford to have preventive care. So we only went to the doctor when something was hurting. We only went to the dentist when something was paining us. So even as students having an understanding that some people don't go to a doctor not because they don't want to, but because they can't afford to. And so when we're interacting with patients and taking the patient's histories, we need to have that understanding that some rural areas, it's not just about access, but it's just you can't afford to actually go. And so I think that's what this documentary also shows, that, you know, there are still parts of this state and this nation and this world that are lacking access, and they would want to do these particular things, but they can't afford to do so. And I think that we need to have that understanding as we, you know, show an interest in going into rural parts of this country to work.
Excellent. Mr. Blake or Dr. Williams, do you have anything to add?
I'll say that, like Dr. Reinhardt said, you know, knowing a person's history makes you more in tune to what that person needs in the future and the present. And so, like I said, the documentary's idea was to try to give a history of the enslaved people and how they ended up here and how we ended up here and how we ended up where we are now. It's hard, like I said, to move forward if you don't know a person's history. And I feel like if we know the history of the enslaved people, it'll make us more sympathetic and empathetic to the plight of Black people in America, which is also bleeding over into the healthcare issues today, discrepancies in healthcare or food deserts or education that are still issues in Black communities today. And those issues date back to when the enslaved people were brought here. And so revisiting that history and telling that history truthfully and completely, I think gives everyone a different perspective on how we deal with those issues today. So like I said, you always got to look back before you can go forward. I just always realize that now in my work, and I want to make sure that people are having discussions like these, because like I said, I'm just so excited that people are here talking about these issues, because for so long, like Dr. Berry said, we haven't talked about these issues or these people or this country in that manner. And so just having these discussions is already a step in absolutely the right direction, and especially with you guys being healthcare professionals, because the healthcare industry is one of the industries that is kind of disparities are great in the African American community as compared to some other areas, some other races in the country. So like I said, just it's a fantastic discussion and a great topic to be involved in.
And that history can also inform us as to why there could be a lack of trust when it comes to the medical community. And so I would say to students and any healthcare provider, don't necessarily take it personally if you have someone who doesn't give you the whole story at the beginning. It could very well be. I mean, think of what some of them were saying in the documentary about, we didn't have these. We weren't allowed to use these certain resources. We were discriminated against. We were enslaved. And think about the community of storytellers. These things are being passed on generation to generation to generation. The trust that wasn't there before wouldn't necessarily just all of a sudden pop up now because it's 2021. I mean, these are things that have been going on a long time. So you might have to work a while to gain the trust of your patient. And you have to have to do the best by them. You need to have that trust. So it could take several times of seeing them before they're finally willing and ready to open up to you. Again, just don't take it personally.
Awesome. Well, I would also like to, excuse me. So I would also like to open up the floor to questions from our participants. So please feel free to put anything in the chat. We also have one question right now in the chat from Dr. Kevin Bennett. I'd be curious about your take on how trust and this history will impact COVID vaccine efforts and what we can do as allies to assist with that.
One of the things that's being done intentionally is showing African Americans getting the vaccine. There's also a movement to engage church pastors in helping to spread the word that it's okay to get the vaccine. If you look historically, and we're not just talking Gullah, but we're talking in especially South African American community, the church is one of the biggest institutions, the most influential institutions. And so if you look at partnerships with the medical community and the church, if you can get buy-in from the head of the church, typically the pastors, you might be able to get buy-in from the parishioners of the church. So there is intentionality with I think it was either yesterday or the day before, either in the state or something that was on my feed that had the pastor, the old pastor, the ones that you've seen with the sleeve up and the showing that on purpose to say, hey, this is okay. The other part, what can we do as allies to assist with that? I would say, so we had in our residency program, with our residents, we would bring like pastors or someone or others from faith religious communities to come and talk with our residents to talk about, again, a partnership between medicine and spirituality. It's especially down here in the South. I mean, I think that's crucial. So showing that you're willing to work with spiritual leaders who, again, have a lot of influence, or can have a lot of influence in the African American community, can go a long way to showing that we're all on the same side here. So just something to consider.
Thank you. And anyone in the chat, please feel free to turn your video on and join in or ask questions.
I was going to say, I'm struck by how similar healthcare is to making movies, because building trust and being intentional are two things that we try to do when we're making our stories and telling documentaries. And I think, being intentional in your actions and building relationships and growing trust with people is also important to tell great stories. And so it seems like those two things intertwine completely, because if people don't trust you or believe that you have their best interest in mind, they're not going to give you a complete story. And they won't give you a complete story about what they need healthcare wise either, apparently, like the doctor said. And so it's amazing to me how closely intertwined storytelling and healthcare caring for people is intertwined, because building trust and being intentional. Like, one of the things that I tried to be, 2021 was my motto, was I want to be intentional with my actions and my words. And I think if we all are more intentional in our thought processes and how we go about our lives, we can certainly help some of these shortcomings in the communities that we're serving.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand also, the lack of trust associated with the vaccine is a lack of trust that was already there before COVID happened. So many of the people who are skeptical about the vaccine were already skeptical about the system in general as it relates to African Americans. So it's not just building trust about or around the issue of the vaccine, it's building trust around the whole issue that we are trying to help you as a community, as an African American community. And I think that may be the bigger issue, because a lot of people are just concentrating, where there are a lot of African Americans who have said that they are not going to get the vaccine. And that's not just related to the lack of trust that's sort of associated with the vaccine. It's a lack of trust associated with what has occurred over the past, say, 20 to 30 years, or even more, to us as a people.
Yeah, I think that right there is the key. It's because like this happened, like the pandemic and the vaccine, it's like show us giving it to Black people, but Black people might also be saying show it giving to us. Like, we want to see that you're not targeting our community. When you look back at historical things like the Tuskegee, that issue, they targeted those people. And so what distinguishes this vaccine from that, and how is this community not again being targeted in a negative way? You have to combat that. And I love what Dr. Reinhardt said about, it's the historical trust, and it's the whole trust for, are you going to be this concerned about my health care after you've given me this? Or is this just to get this vaccine in my arm? Like, so if I do come, can you provide me information on other providers and getting me additional opportunities for healthcare? And if it's not that holistic approach, then it feels targeted. And I can only speak from the Gullah Geechee community. It feels targeted to us. Like, why are you targeting? And but that's the way it's perceived. So we're going to run from that.
Awesome. And Dr. Weiss also had a question. So after you build that trust with these communities, how do you establish it and keep that rapport?
Just in general.
I guess that's a general question. Like, how would we keep that support in that community and that parent-patient relationship? How do we keep it ongoing throughout the years?
I love what Dr. Berry said just now. It can't be just, okay, we gave you the vaccine, bye. And hopefully you wouldn't do that with any patient, except maybe the ER. But besides that, it's your trust is about a relationship. Mr. Blake, when you said the parallels between healthcare and making the movie, I was thinking of the professor emeritus that told a story of that I forgot what it was, but she said she might not ever tell that story again, and it was very emotional for her.
Veronica Gerald.
Thank you. And I was thinking, there's no way on the first day, Mr. Blake meeting her, that she was going to reveal all of that. I mean, I would imagine that took a lot of time building rapport and building trust for her to feel comfortable even sharing that with you. And it's a lot of the same thing. So once we see someone, as you should be doing with all of your patients, I'm kind of talking to the students, you keep up with your patients. You show interest in what they're doing. They're not just, here's the diabetic, here's the hypertensive, this is Mr. Jones, this is Mrs. Smith. I care for Mr. Jones, who happens to have diabetes. I care for Ms. Smith, who happens to have hypertension. But I care about you as a person.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. And Brigida Johnson, did you have a comment you'd like to make? I think your audio is muted.
Check the source of your mic, because you're right now showing is unmuted, but nothing's coming through.
This one?
Oh.
Yeah.
All right, click on all of them, all the mics. Actually, I didn't realize this was a healthcare conversation. I just clicked on, I saw Gullah Geechee movie and just confirmed and got in. And I'm a professor of ethnomusicology at USC. And I was coming in here going to talk about all the music stuff, because I've actually seen the documentary that came before this, maybe 2 documentaries before this, with the Moran family. So just to connect what you guys are saying, also as someone who's actually in the process of changing doctors because of some of these issues you guys are talking about. So definitely there's this disparity among Gullah Geechee communities, but also just Black people in general. And so you look at, I guess, 2 things you guys just addressed, the vaccine as well as building rapport. And you look at our current health system, and this is partly connected to my experience. If we're talking about healthcare professionals talking to people from the Gullah Geechee communities, and we know there's a possible language issue. We saw that in the documentary. They're talking about how quickly the Gullah Geechee Creole sounds. Sometimes people don't understand it or some of the terms. If we're in a system where they tell a doctor, they code it for 45-minute visits, but the doctor's really only in there for about 6 to 8 minutes, and they're rushing you through whatever, and they're trying to take secondhand notes from a nurse who sat with the person for about 3 or 4 minutes, and no one's listening. No one's trying to understand what they're saying, or at least slow down to realize they're going to have to slow down to listen what they're saying. They're going to miss a lot of people, and that goes to your rapport. I noticed I had a follow-up visit with another doctor, an African-American female, and the first thing I noticed that she came in and sat down and talked to me. And I was like, whoa, she's actually sitting down. We were socially distanced in our masks, but she sat down, and I noticed that she was actually listening to me as opposed to figuring out how to diagnose through what I was saying as I was saying it, right? And that idea of someone treating you like a person and not a set of diagnoses that Black people tend to get. And I've seen that in my life as a professional, having to tell people what I do for a living so they won't write off anything I have as something, this is what the Black people get, and I'm going to funnel you to a certain type of care, versus this is a college professor who has access and means to healthcare and family support. So if you see that happening, we hear that with Black women in healthcare all the time, and it is impacted and compounded. We're talking about communities like Gullah Geechee, when there's a lack of understanding, that there's always already distrust. Am I saying the right words when I talk to a doctor? Are they going to understand what I'm saying? Should I bring my whole self to the doctor appointment, or should I try to think about how they're going to perceive me? And so that's a barrier. And if you're in a system where a doctor is funneled to get it in there 30 seconds or less, you're going to miss a whole bunch of people. And then it comes down to the vaccine issue. It's not even that, but even getting to get appointments. I have parents in Georgia, and they both had to go outside the county, one outside the entire region of Atlanta, to get an actual shot. And this is with 2 college-educated daughters, family members, wrangling phone calls, emails, all this stuff. And so if you're in a rural community where there's low access to internet, not a lot of clinics who could put you on a list or whatever, my aunt literally called up to Atlanta, said, come down here to Fort Valley, I'll get you on the list. And my aunt was taking all the siblings and elders in the community to 120 something miles outside of Atlanta to get a shot. And so if that is what we're looking at right now, forget about trust. You can't even get the people who want the vaccine to get the vaccine. Those are things that are also a part of it. And, possibly considering Gullah Geechee has been language, it's been documented as a language for generations. If I click on a government form and I don't want to use English, I have like 7 options in most places to actually fill something out. Are we thinking about possibly giving, Gullah Geechee either interpreters or language versions of forms or regular medical things so people can have a code? If someone from the Gullah Geechee community says this, they probably mean these things. That's something you can code up and put in a document like now. That's nothing that has to be new knowledge. That's one thing I like about this documentary, is such a refreshing, upboot and contemporary look at where you have Gullah Geechee community members who are actively trying to reach out and make these connections. And our services, our healthcare, in my case for education, we're not reaching back. We're just not. I still have students right now who come to my class and say after class, no one's ever talked about Gullah Geechee. I'm Gullah Geechee. I've been ashamed of talking about who I am, or I don't talk about that, or they literally, and I was shocked because I'm from Atlanta. I don't really know this part of that aspect of it. And so if you have young people who are millennials, outspoken in many things, telling me, and zillennials telling me that I'm ashamed, or I'm so happy that you're talking about my people in your class, and I'm like, this is South Carolina. How could this not be a part of every class? And so the actual information is there, the community is there, they're reaching out, they're making documentaries, they're actually doing outreach. And so our systems are not reaching back to them. I think that's probably the biggest problem, where they're there, they have representatives, they know how to do the translation work, and we just need to have it institutionalized in our healthcare and our educational systems. It just has to happen. That's my 2 cents or 3.
Awesome. Thank you for your personal experience. That was really insightful, and I'm glad you got a chance to share that with us. So during the for our registration link, we gave people the opportunity to ask questions. So one of the questions was, so was Professor Opala the first person to make the connection between the Gullahs and Sierra Leone?
I think so. There was a documentary that came out called "The Language You Cry In," and it was about this song that was sang in Mende, and they traced it back to Sierra Leone. And so I think he was one of the first persons to make that connection. And then, like I said, and then 30 years ago, the first trip, Emory Campbell from the Penn Center went over to Sierra Leone and kind of did a state-sponsored trip where they literally went to the president's house. It was really a big deal. And so then our trip, like I said, was kind of a follow-up to these 2 other documentaries. And the difference between our trip and those other trips, though, is our trip was more of a people-sponsored trip. So there were really a lot of just normal Gullah Geechee people that went on the trip. There were a lot of high profile people. They were just normal citizens trying to make a connection to the Gullah Geechee, to the Sierra Leonean people in Sierra Leone. So I do think Joe Apollo was the first person to kind of tie that all together and to kind of build the connection. And maybe I'm wrong, Ms. Johnson. Am I wrong? Oh, okay.
I'll drop a link. Lorenzo Turner. This is actually, like I said, this is old news.
I-
Lorenzo Turner is the
I
father of Gullah studies, and so this goes back. Even the song they trace in that documentary, the recording they had, recordings, and so the Gullah Geechee connection to that part of the continent has been going on for decades. And Lorenzo Turner was actually at SC State, and he heard some Gullah Geechee students talking after class in their language, and he was like, "What is that?" And so he literally was the first one that said, "This is a dialect. This is a language, and it's from Africa." And so this was around, I think, the 30s, and he started to chronicle and take the stories down, and then he would take his recordings of Gullah speakers to his classes, and then an African student said, "I know what that is. I'm from where that's from," and he basically had it translated into Mende, and so the song was just on tapes for like years, and then Professor Paula took it to a musicologist who's also in that documentary, and she was like, "I think I can find this because I work in West Africa." And so it was a long, wonderful detective story, but Dr. Turner, people like Zerl Neil Hurston, they were all the ones saying that these people are distinctive. They're Southern, they're Black, but there's something else going on. And I think Turner was one of the first. He actually went to Africa and recorded Sierra Leoneans and said, "This is the link." And luckily, by the time we get to Dr. Apala's era, we had the means to go back to Africa and take people back to Africa and really find that village. Because even then, I think Civil War broke out and they had a tough time getting back in there. But yeah, this is a long history. And like I said, I'm shocked that I come here and people are still not really embracing Gullah Geechee history like they should outside of Black History Month or outside of Gullah Geechee festivals. This should just be institutionalized in this state, at least in the state where a lot of the people still exist. I was on a program on Friday with 7th generation Gullah speakers, and it's a whole program of people sharing their songs, and it is just something we should try to institutionalize in our systems, because it's almost like I used to live in LA and people understood, oh, we have a lot of Filipino people here, so we're going to have these services. We have a lot of Chicano people who are bilingual, and they just accommodate for those different immigrant groups in a way that should already have happened for the Gullah Geechee in this region.
Thank you. And then another question from our registration link was, what are the plans to connect this work with other Gullah people, like those at the Harrington School on St. Simmons Island in Georgia?
I do not have an answer to that. I'd love to hear an answer to that question.
I can repeat the question if you guys need. It was, what are the plans to connect this work with other Gullah people like those at the Harrington School on St. Simmons Island in Georgia?
I'm not sure we have any plans right now to do that. I know we're setting up some educational sites on our website, ETV, to kind of have educational resources to go along with documentary to be taught in schools. But we're certainly open to doing any of that stuff. I think that's the one thing that I've been realizing is that there's a lot of interest in this documentary and this story that hasn't always been there. And so, like, to create these connections and relationships and links to people is something that that I'll look into. So maybe I'll have to reach out to the St. Simmons Island people and see what we can do down there.
Perfect. And also, I guess to follow up with that, somebody also asked, do you have plans, or what are your plans on getting this film out to other younger people who are across the United States?
We just got the word that NETA, which is about like a platform that does streaming for public broadcast services across the country, is going to pick it up and going to stream it on around Juneteenth. So then it will be available for all PBS stations around the country. So that's pretty exciting as well. So we're happy about that. And telling your friends about it. I think, one thing too, word of mouth is big. So if you got a friend that you think needs to see it, then say something to them about it. Everybody's circles look different. My circle is different from somebody else's circle, and so the more circles we can connect, is important. So share it with your circles that look different than my circle.
Perfect. Thank you. And then we also had a question from Fennis Boyd in the chat. He asked if any members of the panelists work with the Geechee community, and if yes, what are ways to inform your white colleagues about the historical and cultural nuanced complexities of Gullah people?
So I do some work currently. I am Gullah Geechee. I'm from Hughie, native speaker, but a lot of my work is in the public schools, Charleston County, Berkeley County, Dorchester County, working with educators on helping them understand the historical context of the culture, but more importantly, the linguistic structure, because what I found, understand that Gullah is a language and what the rules are of the language, it's translating into students having negative experiences in the classroom. So it's been really interesting to inform the educators that are coming here from the Midwest and California, have never heard of Gullah, and then they walk into the classroom and a student says, "Hey, who that lady there is?" And they automatically have a negative assumption about the intelligence of these students. So having those conversations has been inspiring, because the teachers feel empowered to now have conversations and talk about Gullah, where when I was in school, that I always say Gullah didn't have a name. We know we talk different, and that's what we said, but we didn't identify as Gullah Geechee. So even in that piece, the identity piece is emerging with the current generation. My grandfather, my grandmama, my daddy, and my mama, they still don't say it because it's negative to them. But my generation and the ones coming after me, we are now saying, hey, we are Gullah. And so now we have new platforms like social media where we're able to share linguistic strands of the cultural nuances of the language, for people to be able to easily recognize what Gullah is. So I think this documentary helps to aid in those discussions and give people a solid foundation on the historical context, but then speaking to natives gives them an appreciation for what modern Gullah is.
Thank you. And then we had a question from Brigida Johnson. So she asked if this was available for the general public, and I think Mr. Blake, you put a link in the chat a little bit earlier, and she said that she wanted to pair this with the language you cry in for one of her fall classes, and she wants this to be on all campus libraries.
I totally agree. We've been kind of going back and forth with our station, because what they've done is we have that passport thing that PBS has, and so I think right now you have to be a passport member in order to this documentary. And so Betsy and I have been kind of going back and forth with management, trying to figure out a way that this shouldn't be there. We think it's a documentary about South Carolina for South Carolina people, and they should be free to the public without having to pay a $75 membership to passport. And so so we're working on that. So but I do have a link. So I'm sure Ms. Johnson, we can work something out and figure out a way to do what you need to do. Because to me, getting the work out is more important than the $75 membership. But that's a different level than what I'm at from what I can do.
Yeah. And I think with PBS, I think they sell some things to universities. So I mean, we could order it, because that's how we got The Language You Cry In. We actually watch it on some streaming service through the university for free.
Yeah.
I do have a bootleg of it, but I don't use a bootleg anymore.
Yeah.
But
Bessie and I have been kind of going back and forth, because Bessie did a program called Between the Waters a while ago, and it was behind the paywall, even though it was being used for stuff in classrooms. So teachers were having trouble accessing it, and so we've been kind of having this discussion about what are we doing and why are we doing it. So that's certainly a big discussion that we're working on.
Great.
Excellent. And if anyone wants to ask questions in the chat or wants to chime in through their video, please feel free to do so. We're coming up on 15 minutes left in the conversation. So if you guys have any questions, please go ahead and ask them.
So I just want to add, one of the pieces that was really hit home to me in the documentary was the importance of the songs. And so I think that, as we have so many students who are on this connection, I think that it's important to understand that the songs actually tell the story for many persons of color. And, you know, if we want to become better physicians down the road, having an understanding of these quote unquote songs are extremely important in trying to become connected to whatever local community that you're going to be practicing in. I know when I came to Columbia, you know, from rural Chester County, you know, I wanted to get to know what Columbia was all about. So I was raised a Baptist and I'm going to quote unquote die a Baptist. But one of the things that I did was I started attending some of the local churches here, you know, Lutheran churches, Methodist churches, just to get an understanding of how they worship, but also to understand them as people. And so I think that the more of these types of experiences that you as students can get, you don't have to be a historian, you don't have to be a researcher. But what I do encourage you to do is to get exposed to your local communities. You know, volunteer different places, go to different services, do something that you can interact with people who are different than yourself. These are the ways that you can become a better physician down the road by exposing yourself to these types of experiences right now as students. But the songs tell a tremendous story for the Gullah people and for most African Americans. The songs really tell a story. So you can get an understanding of what they're talking about in the songs. You can understand somewhat of the struggles that they have had to overcome.
Thank you, Dr. Reinhardt. And we also had 2 questions in the chat. So the first question is from Lida. She said, I was curious if you could share about how Gullah people have interacted with healthcare, not just as patients, but healthcare workers and providers. I only recently learned about the Charleston hospital workers strike, and I realized how little I know about Gullah contributors to the healthcare field, or their contributions to the healthcare field.
I'm famous, but I do know that my step grandmother and my best friend and my aunties traditionally have been amazing moms and doulas and nurses by practice. And so in our family, in our community, it's always, you know, within your the healthcare person, and you go to that person in your family for recommendations. So we would tell you something like, you know, go to Annie, because Annie will tell you who is the doctor that you need to go to. So it's always on familial recommendation. But I do know just within our community, a lot of the women in our community are nurses. I don't know of any physicians, but tons and tons of nurses in our community.
And I would also add that the healthcare field is probably not singular in that problem that you don't know the history of what people did in it, you know, Gullah Geechee people. I think that problem probably is everywhere in all history that's taught in this country. And that's why I think, you know, telling the correct history of what people did and accomplishments is important. Having a record of things is important. So we don't have these blank spaces of people that didn't contribute to the healthcare work or either my field of television or whatever, because Gullah Geechee people and African Americans have contributed to all of that throughout the history of this country. And so, you know, so having that history taught and correctly and fully can help alleviate some of those problems, you know. So yeah, so that hospital worker strike is really an interesting time frame in Charleston. There are a lot of really cool things that happened during that hospital strike, and actually Dr. Donaldson and I are trying to figure out a way to do something maybe on that or civil rights in South Carolina during the time, because there was a lot of movement in South Carolina during the civil rights movement that didn't always taught in schools today either. So.
Excellent. And then we had another question in the chat from Joe Kelly. So the panelists kind of talked about this at the beginning of the discussion, but he asked, is there anything that we as future physicians of South Carolina should know about the Gullah Geechee people? And can we pass that on to others in healthcare? And how can we pass it on to others in healthcare?
Dr. Berry said it early on. Just be curious. I think that's the thing that I think people have to be about other people you don't know or don't look like you or don't come from where you come from. Like I said, and that's the one thing that I realized as a storyteller is just being curious and wanting to learn is a really important trait to have as a person, I think, in life in general. And especially when you're dealing with people you don't know anything about. So just be really curious. Ask questions. Ask questions, because I always tell people you don't know what you don't know. So if you don't know something, ask someone. And I think the Gullah Geechee people are such a gentle, beautiful people. They'll help you. They'll explain to you. They won't make you feel bad about it. But don't be afraid to make mistakes. I think one of the things that we're in this time frame now that nobody wants to say the wrong thing or get canceled and that whole cancel culture thing. But we're gonna make mistakes when we're trying to figure each other out, because it's been such a long time since we've had these discussions. So it's okay to make mistakes, but make them of love and honesty and of really wanting to be curious about people to be better. And I think that's one of the one thing that I think is the most important thing you can do, is just be curious.
That was really well said, Mr. Blake. And Dr. Williams, he asked a great question of Dr. Berry. What do you think a barrier may be, if there are any, for there not being any physicians in your community?
I think that's a really great question, first of all. But I think a barrier is access and information. Like we didn't know we could do that. Because Gullah Geechee was a marginalized culture and a marginalized language, it wasn't shared with us that that's something that you actually could pursue. You know, historically, like my grandfather and his family, they knew they could be sharecroppers, but they didn't necessarily push the next generation to go and be physicians. I think that as we continue to, and as the world, as Gullah Geechee people are now more immersed in, we're going to see more Gullah Geechee people become physicians and occupy those spaces now more than previously. But I think a barrier has been access to information that would allow us to occupy those spaces.
Then that says to me that we need to be doing outreach to to say, yes, you can do this too.
Absolutely.
I was just thinking of the mission of this school is to get homegrown physicians that want to serve South Carolinians. Why can't we get homegrown physicians that want to go back to the same community?
That's it. That's powerful.
We also had a comment in the chat from Regina Sipara. I apologize if I pronounced your last name wrong. She said, I think it's also important to value the cultural knowledge and practices such as herbal medicines that are currently being used and not come with the mindset of correcting, but instead you want to enhance.
I love that, and I'm hoping we're doing more of that across the board. And so some of the things we teach now, complementary medicines, we call it complementary, like not, you know, some derogatory name for it that was probably used a while back, but you need to learn this. We need to learn this, because whether or not we like it, our patients are still using it. And it's still part of what they do. So we need to know about this. This is all in the realm of education, and again, knowing your patient, knowing the people that you serve. And the way Mr. Blake said, feel free to ask questions. I hope that we teach that as well. There are going to be a lot more things that you don't know than you know. So when you don't know one of those things, I tell my small group all the time, ask. That's the only way you're going to find out. It's a lot better to just say, I don't understand that. What does this term mean? So you said the hag. What does the hag mean? It's okay to say that, as opposed to just assuming something and being dead wrong and then changing diagnosis, changing treatment, because we were too afraid to ask.
Dr. Berry asked a really important question. Does a bank of Gullah Geechee medical terms exist?
She did ask a great question. I don't know that I'm aware of one, and I think Ms. Johnson or Dr. Johnson was saying the same thing earlier. That could be so easy to do. And I don't know if we had, I think it's just a matter of somebody probably sitting down and doing it. But that it makes so much, it's almost common sense once you ask it in a question like that. Like, why don't we have this?
I think we should work to develop one. I think we can make this happen.
Yeah, actually, I
We
just
need to get together after this call, Dr. Berry.
I actually just Googled it, and so I Googled medical terms related to Gullah, and so there are a couple sites that came up that talks about why is there such a strong herbal tradition amongst Gullah, and it talks about hoodoo as well. So I think there are some things out there. Maybe someone needs to just compile specifically to medical terms, but there is some information out there. I just Googled it.
And I think that goes again to you don't know what you don't know. So if you don't know anything about the Gullah community, you can't look up. You can't look up something you don't know about. And things like hoodoo is different than voodoo. They're not the same thing. So you have to have that curiosity again to want to find this information or to even think that this type of information might be out there.
Dr. Marlene Wilson brought up an excellent point. It sounds like a great medical student or resident project for SOAR. So we should definitely get that idea out within our school.
Hey, this is Kevin Bennett. I actually kind of run SOAR, so that's very timely that I'm on here. So Marlene, that's a great idea. And we're actually at the Rural Center. We are kind of piloting a summer scholars program for undergrad students. And we've already got 2 or 3 that I think are going to come on board unofficially. We haven't announced it to the public yet, but that could be a really interesting experience for them to come and maybe even spend some time with Dr. Berry, explore some of that, get some of these things together, cultural competence. There's a lot of interesting things that I think some students would be very fascinated with. So I think that's a great suggestion.
Well, thank you so much. And we have 2 minutes left for this discussion. So just to wrap up, I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for joining. To the panelists, you guys contributed some really amazing insight, and I was educated, and I'm sure a lot of people who are participating today was educated. Thank you, Mr. Blake, and thank you, SCETV, for letting us watch this documentary. Thank you, Dr. Berry, and thank you, Dr. Williams and Dr. Reinhardt, for contributing from a healthcare perspective. I guess we don't have much time left, but is there any last minute thoughts from any of the panelists?
I just say thank you. I really appreciate you guys being curious about a documentary and wanting to watch it and talk about it and discuss it. Like I said, it's it was a hard trip. It was a long trip. It was a long 14 days. But it was good, and I think it's a really good work. And I think it's important to have these kind of discussions that you facilitate today. So thank you.
Thank you. And I hope a lot of good work can come out of this discussion. I think a lot of good connections were made and really great points were brought up. So I hope a lot of that gets followed up. And if it does, please let me know, because I would be super excited to hear about it.
Thank you.
Can I say real quick, congrats and great job, Holly and her team with the students. These are 1st and 2nd year medical students that basically put this together with a little bit of assistance from us. So great job, guys. And I think the future of medicine is bright when you see this kind of leadership. So good job.
And thank you, Dr. Bennett, and to the SC Center for Rural and Primary Healthcare. You guys helped us out so much in putting this together. So thank you. All right.
Thanks, Mr. Blake, for the documentary. I was filled with so much pride just watching that. It was almost like when the pride I felt when I watched Black Panther.
Thank you so much. I appreciate. Thank you.
Yeah, great job. Great job.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you guys so much. That concludes our discussion, and y'all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you guys
so much. Y'all take care.
Thank you.
all. Great meeting y'all. Bye.